Welcome to Power Lunch Live. I'm Rhett, your host. It's good to be back with you here in December 1st, which just is strange to say that word, December 1st, 2020. Who thought we'd be where we are right now? But anyway, the point of Power Lunch Live is to have today's thought leaders, best-selling authors, people who are doing interesting and amazing work in the world that we can learn from. And today is no exception. Now, a couple things. The show is broadcast on LinkedIn. It's broadcast on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube. And we monitor those feeds during the program. And so if you want to ask a question, get involved in the conversation, please do. We monitor those, so we will check up and get to your questions. But make them relevant, make them on topic. And we'll get to those if we can. Now, I've got Bill Coletti today. Bill is a sought-after reputation management strategist and speaker. He's the best-selling author of Critical Moments, the New Mindset of Reputation Management. He spent more than 25 years of his work experience in global managing high-stakes global crisis issues management and media relations. For both the Fortune 500 and winning global political campaigns. Bill, welcome to the show.
Rhett, it's awesome to be here. I look forward to a great conversation.
Well, okay, so let's bring some definition here. Okay. What is crisis management versus reputation management? What does all that mean? What is that in I know we've all probably watched the show on
Scandal.
TV. Scandal, yes. But it's probably not that. I'm guessing.
No, there have been parts. There are parts like that. I don't bury many dead bodies or fake assassinations, but rarely do I do that. But no, there are elements of that, and so basically a crisis. The way I define a crisis, it's any moment or situation that takes a company off of its strategy, off of what it would rather be doing. Most good companies have strategies and plans and objectives, either for the day or the week or the quarter or the year or the decade. A crisis is something that takes you away from that, and it creates a misalignment between the company's behavior and the public's expectation. All right, so that could be sexual harassment. It could be a data breach. COVID took us all off our strategy for 2020. Those are crises. Those are moments in time, and I talk about them in the book in this context of critical moments. Some of them are an industrial accident. Something blows up in a factory. Something blows up in a facility. There's a crime. You manage it. You move on. There are others that are critical moments that are kind of these long tail reputational issues. And so Uber dealt with a lot of long tail issues till they brought in a new CEO, got rid of the founder. They've managed those, and those are the context around critical moments. Now, reputation management, the definition I really love for reputation management, it is the expectation that the public has about what you say, do, or make next. Mm-hmm. So it's about next expectations. So crisis takes you off your plan. It's where the public's expectations in the moment conflict with your strategy. Reputation is what people think about you over the long term, very often formed by your reactions to a crisis.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And what I mean, with the internet as it is, and with everybody having a voice today, is that harder to manage that reputation?
Absolutely. So you teased out both sides, which are excellent. So social has just created this velocity of information that is really difficult to manage. And in fact, you don't start with the objective of trying to manage it, but it is that it's just, we used to live in a news cycle where you kind of had the deadline of 4 or 5 o'clock to get the paper for the next morning, or you had to get something done before the 5 o'clock news or 6 p.m. news or something like that. So you had a definitive ending of the news cycle. That's a relatively dated concept. Social has changed that. We're now 24/7. The other aspect of it is that anybody and everybody with a cell phone is now a citizen journalist. And if you've got this, you can broadcast, communicate, tell a story in a way that matches up with that velocity. So you've got just simple velocity of time, but then you've also got the velocity of information.
Right.
Yeah. So big. It has changed what we do significantly.
And has that changed? I mean, is it even more now so that, particularly when we talk about reputation, and you were talking about, how you phrase that, and I loved how you phrased that in terms of what you do next. Mm-hmm. With all the social issues that we've had in the past few months, and mm-hmm. the social unrest and the social justice issues, are companies even worried about now what their employees are saying externally?
Yeah,
I mean,
awesome. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And so I think, you can look at it through the social unrest. And I want to talk specifically about that because we've learned a lot just on those issues of social risk. So we'll come back to that. But just take COVID. So I've had 3 CEOs that have been clients that have just shared with me, and they said some form of, I never knew how important employee communications were in the context of COVID, of telling my team when and how and if we're going to come back, or when and how and if to stay home. And so people have really realized that your team is really, really critically important. I think we all kind of gave it lip service in 2019, but 2020 brought that to super crystal clear relief, because it's often been said, your employees are your best brand ambassadors. They're the best people to talk about your brand, talk about your services, your features and benefits. And if you don't have them on your side, it's hard to get, customers on your side. So absolutely less brought about by the civil unrest and what we call social risk, more acutely put on the point specifically related to COVID. And we've had such a dynamism of issues this year.
Yeah. I mean, it's just been this influx. But I do think that, going back to what I was thinking, is I think that even more so now, employees are actually part of that equation in terms of what are you going to do next? You said you believe in these issues. You're going to do better in these issues. You support these issues. But, I think it's got to just be another big element that people have to pay attention to, particularly what they say on social and what they say out in public. So, what is how does a corporate crisis impact a company's reputation? Talk about that a little bit. I know you hit on a little bit of it, but
yeah. So we generally find that the public is forgiving about some issues. Okay, and I think I really believe that we've learned a lot this year about issues related to social risk. And we should talk about what the implications are of those types of new risks that people are dealing with around social. Yeah. But I think the public is generally forgiving. I think that we think about risk in 3 different ways, and risks basically is the pre-identification of a crisis. You have strategic risks, which are things the company intended to do for economic benefit. You have preventable risks, which you simply should have zero tolerance for. There should not be metal shavings in hamburger patties. That simply shouldn't happen. Right. There shouldn't be sexual harassment in your workplace. And then lastly are external things related to force majeure, the weather. Think about the Gulf Coast of the United States, things outside of your control, things where law enforcement's involved are external. So you've got strategic, you meant to do it, preventable, it should never happen, and the external things outside of your control. So the way that crises impact a company is directly related to the type of crisis it is. I think the public is really forgiving when you have these external crises and you address it. You say, here's what's going on. Here's what we're doing to fix it. And people are relatively forgiving to move forward. They want transparency and authenticity.
To be clear, though, what does that mean? Like an external, explain that one more time.
So an external risk is a risk directly related to force majeure weather. So it's a hurricane in the Gulf of Mexico, or a crazy person comes on your campus, doesn't breach your security, but does something crazy. All right. Gotcha. So if they breach your security and get upstairs to the CEO, you probably should have prevented that. But if something crazy external outside of your control, people are generally forgiving. They want to know you're on top of it. You've stopped it. People are safe. And then we're going to move on. Right. Preventable, metal shavings in a hamburger patty. There should not be metal shavings in hamburger patties. Is people don't want to hear a bunch of excuses. They just want to say, we screwed up. I'm sorry. We fixed it. And here's what we're going to do to make it right. Buy one, get one free, coupons, whatever you do to make it right.
Right.
Strategic is we made a decision to use red dye number 5. You'll remember that from our youth. We made a decision to use red dye number 5. We made a decision to close this factory, to eliminate the third shift, to decrease the production of this product. The public is forgiving if you do a good job explaining why you did it. Where companies get in trouble is they make these strategic decisions. I'm going to do one of these things. And people are like, well, I'm confused by that. And then people treat it like it's a preventable risk. It's not. You and I, a bunch of smart people sat around a boardroom and we said, we are going to do this for some sort of strategic benefit. The public they're less in a forgiving frame of mind around strategic risks. And they are more in a, why'd you do that? You need to do a better job explaining it. So those 3 contexts of risks are how risks impact organizations. The way organizations get themselves into trouble is by moving slowly, not understanding who's in control, and not really embracing their mission and values and what they stand for. That's where they get in trouble. But those 3 risks are a way to think about the implications for companies.
Are there risks that aren't forgivable? I mean, are there some types that just aren't, that you really can't get past?
Hard to say that. There are some examples of that often get blamed on the risk, but there are so many other systemic root causes of companies that have been demised by that. Right. So typically, firing the CEO and changing the leadership team gives people a second chance. There have been companies that have been crippled by a crisis and then just got through mergers and acquisition, sort of got swept up, and we don't really know about that brand anymore. But there's also situations where Boeing, that the 737-800, 2 tragic accidents where hundreds of people died, but the plane's rebooted, the plane's on its way back, and we're going to be flying on that 800 again. And so, there are a few examples of what's in your mind, I think, when you're asking that question about companies that just never made it back. But it's not like a crisis has ended an industry. We've had plenty of chemical accidents. We've had plenty of industrial accidents. We've had lots of Ponzi schemes and bank frauds and sexual harassment. Those individuals are not doing that much anymore, and there have been fines and penalties, but we still do those things in corporate culture in America.
I'm glad you mentioned the Boeing, the 737 MAX. Mm-hmm. I was having a discussion with a friend the other day, and we were talking about, would you get on that plane? Mm-hmm. And I just wonder, why didn't they rename that plane?
Yeah. So
I don't understand.
I don't know either. I'm sure you could argue it backwards and forwards, and it's a little bit of a bait and switch. It is what it is. Sure, you could have called it the 7 something else mini or whatever you could have called it. I think companies, because they hear guys like me talking about transparency and authenticity. Is it easier to explain and defend that, no, this is a good plane, this had a problem that we fixed and we've moved on and we've got trust, or someone accusing me of being too cute by half because we now call it the 737 mini or whatever we call it? So I can understand it. I don't think it's as super simple of a decision of let's just slap a new brand on it. I think the public is a little bit more discerning, and kind of, there are a lot, back to our conversation about citizen journalists, there's plenty of people that want to out you and make you seem, and so I think it is a smart strategic decision to decide to have that conversation. But I could argue it both ways, quite frankly. And I think I would probably recommend, with one high profile like that, don't change it. Just tell people it's good. We fixed it. We're moving on. Being cute, that probably, putting a 0.5 after it or a version 2 or whatever doesn't make a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, no, I get that, and we were sort of saying
Sure.
that in jest.
Yeah, no, I understand. But I'm sure but it is in jest. But I'm sure it's a strategic conversation. I hope there's a board table somewhere where someone asked that question for Boeing, and they talked about it.
They must have.
Yeah,
they must have tested that and figured
totally not worth it.
We're going to take lumps if we do that, and
exactly
bring a lot more attention to it if we do that. So let's just, if we fly again and we have a good safety record, that's gonna do everything we needed to do
and tell a great story. And that to me is the really exciting frontier for crisis communications. I've made my career running around as a firefighter when these incidents happening, coming in after the fire's already started, telling stories and working with people to sort of get their messaging straight. Risk mitigation is the new frontier for crisis communications. So if we can think strategically about the public's expectations about that decision perfectly, okay? If we can think about the public's expectations around that in advance, that's where crisis communicators are not firefighters, but they're actually fire preventers. And that to me is that's the promised land for the future of my industry and what I do.
What mindsets and behaviors separate leaders that do this well and who have just completely failed when it comes to a crisis?
Yeah,
I mean,
awesome.
COVID's a great example of that, right?
But, yeah. Really, really fabulous stuff. So, one of the things that we as a firm are standing up as a learning through all of this that we discovered is we're standing up something called Kith Academy, and it is a small online live training course for leaders to talk about the mindset and the behavior of great communicators. And so there's a handful of things that we think are really, really important. I think my clients that I'm most proud of, it roots around self-awareness. They understand that the best they can do is tell the best truth that's available to them, understand that there's a vacuum, always be communicating. One great speech is not going to solve this. It is always to be communicating. So the mindset is A, you got to know yourself. B, you got to understand the public. What the public wants is dialogue. They want information. They want their itch to be scratched. And that requires constant and perpetual communications.
Or they'll fill that.
Or they'll fill it for you. And then the third one that I think is critically important on leaders, how leaders show up in a crisis, is asking great questions. Have the ability to ask really, really good questions. Now, these are things done in the boardroom or done in the office, not necessarily for the public. But I think if you figure out who am I, what do I stand for? Then thinking about how are other people receiving this, and I need to always be communicating, and it's okay to not know the answer. And then 3, how do I ask great questions to get to the root cause so that I can always be communicating? I think those are the mindsets of what make really terrific leaders. You also throw around words and around transparency and authenticity and trustworthiness. But I think those are byproducts of knowing yourself, what feels right to you, understanding what people expect, and then really asking good questions to get to the bottom of things.
Yeah, no, I think a lot of the people that I worked with in coaching during this crisis, one of the traits that I think really stood out to me of people who did this successfully was they made a point to have an update every day, right? And really over communicate. Be honest. They were honest about what they knew, what they didn't know. They were honest about what things might look like in 6 months and 1 month, 1 week down the road, right? I think what I saw a lot happen was that they at least gave some confidence to their people that they were thinking and working on these issues, paying attention to these issues, and that they cared enough to update their people every day as to where they were.
Love that.
And they asked, you're right. Now that you said questions, and they asked good questions, They did. They were very, very conscious about how people were feeling, what they were concerned about, and they listened. They learned. I think a lot of these CEOs that I work with, they learned to listen a lot better. During this.
Yeah. Yep. And that's such a, we simplify it into ABC. Always be communicating, and we just think that's critical. The other thing that's embedded in what you said, which is so smart, and those are great insights from the leaders that you're talking to, is that we found this sort of very simple equation in crisis. Okay, what's the key differentiator between good and great crisis communications? We think it's speed and being fast to market to fill that vacuum. And the way you get speed is an equation. It's your mission and values plus your chain of command equals speed. So the leaders that know what they stand for, just like we mentioned, understand chain of command, and then always communicate. Those are the folks that really get speed right, which is the key differentiator. And chain of command is a critical part of that. And that's where asking great questions come in. There's a lot embedded within chain of command. But we've all learned, we've seen leaders do great. We've seen leaders do really poorly in this season of COVID.
Well, I mean, if your values are aligned with your communication, right, and you can communicate in speed, because you're not. I mean, if you're communicating with your value, I mean, it makes communicating what
we're not making it up as we go along. We know what we stand for, and that if you look back at companies that get it right, and we spend a ton of time looking at this, it's that what do we stand for? Who's going to help me make this decision? And that's about it. After that, it's just really sort of fluff.
And usually the decision's pretty clear. I mean,
absolutely.
if you're aligned with the values, right, we're going to take that product back. We're going to recall that product, or we're going to do this. It's pretty simple.
It is, but we have such matrixed, highly complex organizations, is that the impact on those that matter to your organization, make those decisions complex, but don't make them impossible. You have to understand what, and the reason mission and values is so important. And I'm sure the work that you do really gets people to the nub, to the heart of their DNA of what really matters. That's when decisions get easier. With the complexity of a multivariant organization and the complexities of all of the different stakeholders that are involved. But if you get to the root of the matter, you make the right decision.
Is there anything that small companies can learn from large companies in terms of crisis management? Because I know a lot of times, smaller companies probably not going to be able to bring on somebody like you to help. Maybe I hope I'm wrong. Maybe they can. I don't know what the price point for something. I don't know what the price point for this is, but are there ways that sort of some tips that you can give to sort of the regular corner bakery, right? That has crisis as well. I mean, they deal with crisis just as much as the big companies. What are some things? I know you talked about communication. What are some other things that you can advise?
Yeah. So really terrific question. I think there's two very concrete things. Have a platform for communications. Always be communicating. If that's at a staff meeting, if that's musings from the corner office or musings from the table in the bedroom, whatever that is, whatever those musings are, but have a vehicle to be able to tell your story. Okay, so that's one thing that small companies can figure out. And that could be a stand-up at the bakery at 6 o'clock in the morning, where everybody talks about the orders that we've got for the day, where a leader has the opportunity to do that. So that's the first thing. It's all derivative of always be communicating. The second, practical, simple, and really straightforward. Pick up the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Financial Times, USA Today, whatever. Grab a headline and said, if that had happened to us, how would we respond? Or refine what you read in the paper from an industry newsletter that someone, if you're in a particularly niche industry, if you get an industry publication, or from your trade group, say, if that had happened to us, how would we respond? Could we respond? And that then leads to a bunch of other questions. Who would be our spokesperson? What would we apologize? Do we have insurance to cover a situation like this? Those are simple things that you and I, small business leaders, we can do, and that we coach both our small and our large clients to do. And it's basically a form of simulation. So one, always be communicating, have a platform to communicate, big or small. And then two, ask yourself, what if this had happened to us? Which is basically a form of simulations.
I'm glad you said that, because when I ran the toy company, we were in a hurricane zone. So we had scenarios.
Where were you?
We were in South Carolina. Yeah.
Yeah, sure.
And so we had gamed out some scenarios, and that never happened. But actually going through that process of what we would do when we were hit with things like that, when we did have a crisis that wasn't similar but had the same sort of business impact, it helped us get our heads around that a lot quicker. And we were actually able to go back to that playbook, scrap a little bit of it, like the evacuation part of it, but implement some of the things that we were going to have to do and needed to do. And that really did. So gaming out, that's brilliant. And that's great advice, because it does help to think about what you will do in certain situations. And I think that we can all let our minds go there. And I think that's healthy to let it go there, right? To think about what could happen.
Yep. Yeah. And we charge clients, $20,000 to $40,000, big companies, to do these really immersive simulations. And that's awesome. But there is so much value in just that elegant simplicity of what if. And that's what you guys did. You did it because of a risk. Okay. You knew that was an external risk that you had to get ready for. And you found, just by doing that one exercise, made you better in multiple other exercises as well. So that simple question, and it yields, I've watched small companies do this, just saying, what if this had happened to us, yields so many operational questions, communications questions, legal questions, employee communications questions. It's a very, very simple but magical tool to say, what if this had happened to us? Yeah,
no. And the thinking through that, I think, is really valuable. I'm glad you brought it up, because I think that's a really good takeaway for our conversation today. This has been great, Bill. Thank you so much. I want to talk about. I do want to bring the book back in, because we didn't really get a chance to talk about the book. Talk about critical moments. What is the new mindset for reputation management? What does that mean?
Yeah, it's a great book. I'm very proud of it. And so, I'll tell you the story, Rhett, if you don't mind, kind of where it came from. And so I had just finished a crisis engagement with an amazing company with a female CEO based in New York. And she and I had gone through kind of 4 days of this gauntlet of media coverage and expectations. They survived, they moved on, we answered the questions, and they have now gotten back to normal. But during the course of that conversation, I kept talking about reputation. I kept talking about this reservoir of goodwill. And one of the things they had done a good job of is that as they were getting attacked by by regulators, the public, and lots of different people, as they were getting attacked, there was this belief that this is not the company I know. That's not the people I know. And she was an amazingly forthright leader. She represents a lot of the things you and I were just talking about. And so we're debriefing at the end of this really very difficult week. And she said, Bill, you've brought up reputation and reputation management a number of times. So what do you mean by that? And I used great consultant jargon and consultant blah, 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 and tried to explain it. And I had no idea. I knew what I was talking about, but I did a poor job of explaining it to her. And she said, let me give you some advice. What I need is a model. I need a framework. I need the ability to manage reputation just like I manage everything else in my organization. Okay, so if you think about big companies, there's a system and a process for janitorial services. There's a system and a process for litigation. There's a system and process for manufacturing, for HR onboarding, you name it, how people turn the lights on in the morning. There are systems, either written or formal or informal, but there's a process. And so she said, what I need is something like the 4 C's of marketing. And I don't know if you remember the 4 C's of marketing way back when, but it's a concept from the 1960s. It's about the marketing mix. And you've got this concept of the 4 C's. And she said, I need something like that. So that night I flew home. I was on the plane and I flew home, pulled out a cocktail napkin, and I wrote the 4 A's of reputation management, which became the cover art for the book. And so that's the foundation of what we're trying to do. And it sort of begins with this notion of awareness. How do you become aware of what your organization stands for? Mission and values fit into that. How do you become self-aware? How do you understand what the marketplace expects of you? Then there's this question about assessment. Let's just go ask people, ask our employees, ask our competitors, ask our customers, what do they think about not our features and benefits of our products, but what do they think about our reputation? From that, you get to authority. Authority is you share those insights with your senior leaders, and the senior leaders say, yes, we want to grow our reputation. There's a solid blue line in the model. That's the barrier. That's the membrane from guys like me that jump immediately to action. And action is the final step. But unless you go through this notion of awareness, assessment, and authority, then cross the membrane, then get to action. So what she was looking for a model, and that's the new mindset of reputation management, is that there actually is now, you can put budget and write KPIs and write responsibilities for all 4 of those layers, just like you can for any other discipline within any other part of your organization. So that's what we talk about in the book, and trying to unpack that and sort of bring the examples of bring the examples around reputation management.
Well, Bill, thank you so much. This is and thank you for spending some time with us today here on Power Lunch Live. The book is called Critical Moments: The New Mindset of Reputation Management. You can get that, I'm sure, on Amazon and other places where books are sold. I'm probably not in the bookstore nowadays, but definitely online. And look, we're going to be back next week on Power Lunch Live. And until then, we'll see next week. Have a great week. You can look at the upcoming schedule for December at powerlunch.live. And until then, until next week, have a great week.